I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who went through her husband's phone. But I also never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering who her husband was with when he wasn't home. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who measured the scent of his cologne on his shirt, trying to decipher if it smelled like cheap whiskey or someone else's perfume. And yet, here I was, sitting on the edge of our neatly made bed, the glow of Daniel's phone illuminating my trembling hands. It started small. A shift in the air, something just off enough to be noticed but not enough to be called out. Daniel had always been dependable, almost to a fault. He was the kind of man who had a routine for everything. Up at 6, coffee black, gym 3 times a week, home by 6 unless there was a work dinner, which he always told me about in advance. But then, little things started to change. Excuses that didn't make sense. A meeting that ran late. A client dinner that hadn't been on his calendar. Missed calls that he never returned in front of me. The biggest change, though, was the way he looked at me, or rather, the way he stopped looking at me. Daniel had always had this way of making me feel like I was the only woman in the room, even in a crowd. But now? Now his eyes flicked past me, like he was always looking for something else, something better. I tried to ignore it. To convince myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining the distance between us. But doubt is like a splinter, it burrows in deep, festers, and refuses to be ignored. And tonight, as Daniel lay asleep on the couch after another mysteriously long night out, I finally caved. His phone was right there. Face down, but unlocked, just for a second. Just long enough for me to pick it up. My stomach twisted as I swiped up and opened his messages. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The same group chats, work updates, the random texts from his brother about football. And then, a number with no name. I almost put the phone down. Almost convinced myself that if I kept digging, I'd find something I couldn't unsee. But my hand moved on its own, and before I could stop myself, I tapped the conversation open. The words on the screen sent my world tilting. Had fun last night, baby. Can't wait for round 2. My throat tightened. I scrolled up, my breath catching. The messages were short, teasing, just vague enough to leave me questioning, but undeniable in their intent. There were photos, too, ones that made my hands go cold. Daniel shifted on the couch, exhaling softly in his sleep. Completely unaware that, in this moment, our entire life was falling apart. I set the phone down, my pulse roaring in my ears. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know how long this had been going on. But I knew one thing. Daniel was lying to me. And I was about to find out just how deep the betrayal went. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the phone's discovery pressing down on my chest like a cinder block. Every few minutes, my gaze would flick toward Daniel, still passed out on the couch downstairs, his breathing slow and steady, as if he hadn't just destroyed the life we had built. I wanted to shake him awake, to shove the phone in his face and demand answers. Who is she? How long has this been going on? Was it just one time, or have you been feeding me lies for months? But I didn't. Because I didn't want his version of the truth. I wanted the truth. I wasn't going to be the naive wife who cried and pleaded, who let him twist the narrative and convince me I was overreacting. I wouldn't give him the chance to tell me it was nothing, that it was just a misunderstanding, that I was crazy. No. I would find out exactly what he had done, and then I would decide what I was going to do about it. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket up to my chin, trying to quiet my racing thoughts. But my mind was relentless, replaying every little moment over the past few months that I had ignored. The extra showers. The new cologne. The texts he'd swipe away before I could see them. The way he suddenly seemed lighter. Like a man with a secret. A delicious little secret. And now, I had a secret of my own. My fingers itched to grab his phone again, to comb through every last detail. But I knew better. The messages were already too vague, nothing concrete, just enough to send my mind into a spiral. If I wanted real proof, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed a plan. A cold calm settled over me, quieting the storm inside my chest. This wasn't the time for emotions. This was the time for strategy. Daniel couldn't know I suspected anything. Not yet. If he had any inkling that I was onto him, he'd cover his tracks, delete the evidence, change his patterns. No, I needed to be the same wife I had always been. I needed to smile when he kissed my cheek, laugh at his jokes, pretend I didn't notice the faint trace of perfume that wasn't mine. If he thought I was oblivious, he'd let his guard down. And I needed him unguarded. The messages were suggestive, but they weren't enough. If I confronted him now, he'd have room to wriggle out of it, to gaslight me into believing I was imagining things. No. I needed proof. Did they meet in a hotel? A bar? Was it just texts, or had he crossed the final line? If he had, where? When? And most importantly, who? I needed to find out who she was. A stranger? A coworker? Someone I knew? The thought made my stomach twist. But I swallowed it down. I wasn't ready for that answer yet. I would push him, just gently. A comment here, a casual question there. If he had a guilty conscience, he'd slip. He'd hesitate, fumble over a lie, maybe even get defensive. And I would be watching. Listening. Waiting. Daniel might have had the upper hand when he started this game, but he had no idea that I had just joined in. And I wasn't planning to lose. By the time the sun started to rise, I had my plan. I took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as I listened to the familiar sound of Daniel stirring downstairs. The clink of a coffee mug, the shuffle of his footsteps. He had no idea that everything had changed overnight. I sat up, smoothed my hair, and forced a soft smile onto my lips. Time to play my role. Morning came, and with it, a performance I had never prepared for. I sat at the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, watching as Daniel moved around the kitchen like nothing had changed. Like our life wasn't teetering on the edge of destruction. "Morning," he said, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. I forced myself to smile. "Morning." I wondered if he could hear the way my heart pounded against my ribs, if he could sense the weight of the knowledge I now carried. But no, he was too confident, too comfortable in his web of lies. He had no idea that I wasn't the oblivious wife he thought I was. I watched him carefully, searching for any signs of guilt. But he was smooth. Too smooth. He poured his coffee, checked his phone, probably reading her messages right in front of me, and then leaned against the counter like any other morning. "You have a busy day?" I asked casually, sipping my coffee. He barely looked up from his phone. "Yeah, meetings all afternoon. Probably gonna run late again." "Of course you are." I nodded, playing the part. "That's fine. I was thinking of having dinner with Claire tonight." A test. If he was seeing someone, if he was planning to meet her, he would be too eager, too quick to encourage me to go. Daniel glanced up, pausing just for a second before nodding. "Sounds good. You should." I tucked that hesitation away, filing it under suspicious behavior. One piece of the puzzle. The first rule of cheating? Never leave a trail. But men like Daniel, arrogant, certain of their ability to juggle two lives, always got sloppy eventually. I needed his phone. That night, as he showered, I moved quickly. His passcode hadn't changed, he was careless, too comfortable in his routine. I scrolled through his messages, finding the same conversation from last night. No name. Just a number. I took a deep breath and opened it. Her message from this morning was short but suggestive. "Miss me?" Daniel's response made my stomach twist. "Always." I wanted to throw the phone across the room, wanted to storm into the bathroom and scream at him through the steam. Always? That was the kind of thing a man told his wife. The kind of thing he used to say to me. Instead, I took a screenshot and sent it to myself, deleting the notification the second it popped up. I scrolled further, looking for clues, where they met, what they had done. But Daniel was careful. No details, no names. Just flirtation. But there was one thing. A time. 9 p.m. I checked the call log. He had called her at 9:46 p.m. last night. I glanced at the bathroom door, at the sound of the running water. My mind raced. He had left the house around 8. Said he was meeting a client for drinks. Liar. I scrolled further and found another message from 2 days ago. Same time. And her response. Same place. Where? That was my next question. I put his phone back exactly how I found it, my hand steady despite the storm brewing inside me. If I wanted real proof, I had to catch him in the act. Messages could be explained away, twisted into something innocent. But a meeting? A secret rendezvous? That was undeniable. I needed to know where he was going. And I had just the way to find out. Daniel had a habit, one I used to find endearing, but now, it was my weapon. Every morning, like clockwork, he plugged his phone into the car charger the second he got inside. And every time he did, his phone automatically connected to our shared cloud account, including his location history. That night, as he slept, I opened my laptop and logged in. It was all there, a map of everywhere he had been. My stomach clenched as I traced his steps. The meetings, the office, the store where he picked up milk on Sunday. And then, an address I didn't recognize. It wasn't a restaurant. Not a hotel. It was a private residence. I stared at the screen, my pulse thundering. The address wasn't far, just on the other side of town. He had been there twice this week. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a mix of rage and adrenaline pumping through me. Who the hell lives there? I had my proof. Now, I needed to see it with my own eyes. I wasn't going to sit at home, waiting for more messages, for more lies. I was going to follow him. The next night, Daniel kissed my forehead before leaving, same as always. Don't wait up, he said with a smirk, grabbing his keys. I smiled. Have fun. He didn't notice the way my hands curled into fists beneath the table. The second his car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my keys. Tonight, I would find out the truth. Tonight, I would catch him. I followed him. The night was thick with fog, the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows as I gripped the steering wheel, keeping a safe distance behind Daniel's car. My heart pounded with every turn he took, every flicker of his brake lights. I had never done anything like this before, never imagined I would have to. But here I was, tailing my husband like a woman in a crime thriller, except this wasn't fiction. This was real. And by the end of the night, I would know everything. Daniel didn't drive toward downtown, where I had assumed he might be meeting her. No restaurants, no bars, no hotels. Instead, he took the highway, exiting near a quieter part of town, a neighborhood I didn't recognize. The houses here were spaced far apart, tucked behind tall trees, the kind of place where privacy was valued. Where secrets could be kept. He slowed down, turning onto a narrow street. I killed my headlights, staying back just enough so he wouldn't notice me. My breath caught as he pulled into a driveway, his car disappearing behind the shadow of a modest but well-kept house. A house I had never seen before. I parked a few houses down, heart hammering. My fingers trembled as I grabbed my phone, opening the map. Who lived here? The address meant nothing to me. No friends I recognized, no family, no business I had ever heard him mention. I watched as Daniel got out of his car, his posture relaxed, comfortable. Like he had been here many times before. Then, the front door opened. And she stepped out. My entire body went cold. I expected someone young, glamorous, maybe a woman in a tight dress, the kind that smelled like vanilla perfume and cheap regret. I expected someone who looked like the other woman. I did not expect her. I couldn't see her face clearly at first, just the silhouette of a woman leaning against the doorway, her arms crossed like she had been waiting for him. She wasn't dressed seductively, no slinky dress, no sky-high heels. She was in sweatpants and a tank top, barefoot, casual. Like she belonged there. Like he belonged there. Daniel walked up to her, and before I could even process what I was seeing, she reached out, touching his arm with a familiarity that made my stomach twist. He didn't pull away. Instead, he stepped closer. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could feel it. The intimacy. The comfort. This wasn't a hookup. This was something more. Something worse. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest felt too tight, my breathing too shallow. I wanted to march up to that house, to her, to him, to rip the truth out of them. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed to know who she was. I needed her name. I pulled out my phone, snapping a photo of the house, of the driveway, of Daniel standing too close to her. Then I opened a search engine, fingers moving on autopilot as I typed in the address. A name popped up. I stared at it. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I knew exactly who she was. And I finally understood why Daniel had been so careful. Why he had been so secretive. Why this betrayal cut deeper than I ever could have imagined. Because this wasn't just some random woman. She was someone I never would have suspected. Someone who had been close to us for years. Someone who knew me. I clamped a hand over my mouth, a silent scream clawing at my throat. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated betrayal. And now that I knew the truth, I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to destroy them. I had spent the entire night lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The house. Her name. The way Daniel had stood so close to her, so comfortable, like they had been sharing something intimate for a long, long time. I had all the proof I needed. Now, it was time to burn everything down. Daniel came home late the next evening, just like I knew he would. His keys jingled in the lock, and I sat perfectly still at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. He walked in, ran a hand through his hair, and let out a sigh. "Long day," he muttered. I smiled. "I bet." He barely looked at me, moving to the fridge, grabbing a beer like he hadn't just spent the past 2 nights lying to my face. "You eat yet?" "No." Daniel cracked the bottle open, taking a long sip, finally looking at me. "You okay?" I tilted my head, my voice steady. "Where were you?" He froze for a fraction of a second before setting the bottle down. "Work ran late." "Lie." I leaned back in my chair, studying him the way a scientist studies a specimen under a microscope. "Strange," I murmured. "Because I could have sworn you were somewhere else." His jaw tightened. "Hannah." I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen, and turned it toward him. The photo of her house. The one I had taken the night before, when I had watched him disappear inside. Daniel's face drained of color. I let the silence stretch between us, letting him feel it, letting him sit in the weight of what he had done. Then, I spoke. "You were at her house." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "I don't. Don't lie." My voice was ice. "Not now. Not when we're at the end of this." His fingers flexed against the counter. "It's not what you think." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh. Then tell me, what exactly am I thinking?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, his gaze darting away. A dead giveaway. I stood up slowly, walking toward him. My hands were steady. My voice was calm. Because I wasn't hurt anymore. I was angry. "She was in our house," I whispered. She sat at our dinner table. She smiled in my face while she was sleeping with my husband. I could see the guilt, the shame flickering across his features. But it wasn't enough. I wanted him to break. How long? I demanded. How long have you been sneaking off to her house? How long have you been making me feel like I was crazy for suspecting something was wrong? Daniel exhaled, pressing his hands into his face. He knew he was caught. There was no way out. 6 months, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, like I had expected it, like it wasn't still twisting a knife into my gut. And tell me, I continued, stepping closer. When you were done with her, did you come home to me and kiss me with the same mouth that told her you missed her? He flinched. Good. Daniel dragged a hand down his face, his voice breaking. Hannah, I'm sorry. Sorry? I laughed again, but there was no humor in it. You're sorry? For what, exactly? That you got caught? Or that you did it? I never meant for this to happen, he whispered. I shook my head, stepping back, disgust curling in my stomach. You chose for this to happen. Every single time you texted her. Every time you drove to her house. Every lie you told me. Tears welled in his eyes. But I didn't care. You know what the worst part is? I asked, voice shaking. It's not that you cheated. It's who you cheated with. His face crumpled. Hannah. I turned away before he could finish, before he could spit out another excuse, another pathetic plea for forgiveness. I had heard enough. This was done. I grabbed my bag, already packed, already waiting. You don't have to lie anymore, Daniel, I said, voice steady as I reached for the door. You can go to her now. You can have her. His breath hitched. Where are you going? I smiled. Anywhere but here. And with that, I walked out, leaving him standing there, his lies, his betrayal, his pathetic apologies, alone. Where he belonged.